Lloyd, where philosophy matters.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Jack Lloyd here, back on with ZeroState. I have an exciting guest today to talk to, but before that, just want to let you know that this weekend, Fawn and I are going to be doing a live performance at the LPF Con. So if you're thinking about going out there, definitely come on by. We're going to be doing a little show there. We're going to be tabling as well. I actually have my new book out that I'll be tabling for, The Definitive Guide to Libertarian Voluntarism. So I'll be doing little signed copies there, have the comic and things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Plus, of course, we're doing a little fundraiser as well, and I have some donative gifts for that. So there'll be some interesting things, and we'll be hanging out, just chilling with everybody, doing the Mises Caucus Bash on Friday night, chilling with people and things like that. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. So without further ado here, looks like my guest is here, and my guest is Reed Coverdale. He is the host of the Naturalist Capitalist Podcast, and he is a heavy, not light, heavy haul truck driver. So welcome on, Reed. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Jack. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I feel energized. I got some good sleep. It's been a busy day for you. How's that been?
It's been interesting. I started out with some truck issues early this morning and then tried to scale out at a way station that was being redone. And the gas station clerk was trying to get it to work. And so I didn't hit the road till kind of late. And then I drove through a snowstorm in New Mexico. I was in southern New Mexico and it was like 10 degrees. And actually the truck stops, water pipes all froze because it's way below the temperature they usually ever get here. But it's been an interesting day, man.
Wow, that's crazy. Is like in terms of the weather there, I'm not as familiar with this terrain. I've never actually been to New Mexico. So is it very icy in terms of the roads or just more like snowy? Like what kind of driving is it like?
Yeah, there was kind of wet snow when I got kind of into the more northern part of the state up north of Albuquerque. But down near Roswell where I was, I think that's pretty even with northern Florida as far south as it is. So it's pretty far south. So it's weird for it to drop down to those cold temperatures. So everyone was freaking out.
Yeah, that's wild. I couldn't honestly do it. What you do, I'd be nervous driving a big truck in that kind of weather. That's scary. So
yeah, you get used to it. I mean, the thing about truck driving is there's no test run. I guess they do have some driving simulators you can try, but I never used those. It was just jump in this truck. Okay, now get in this bigger truck. Okay, now this bigger one. Okay, now haul this trailer. Now this bigger trailer. Okay, now this big piece of equipment. Okay, now this bigger piece. And you just keep going and hope you never hit anything. And, we just kind of get the hang of it as it goes.
Is there anything that you have to do in terms of licensure or any type of like certification when you go through that process of going to the bigger trucks, kind of like what you have with like airplanes in the class and things like that?
Yeah, it's not as many levels as there is with an airplane, but there's a Class A license, which is a tractor trailer, and then there's a Class B license, which is just a straight truck. So like a dump truck is just a Class B license. If you're going to haul a trailer behind it, then you need a Class A. And then there is a Class C license, but that's not even weight based. That's just for hauling like hazardous materials or for a short school bus. Like you need a CDL to haul more than 16 passengers. And then there are all these different endorsements. So I have a double triple trailer endorsement, and then I have a tanker endorsement. So I can haul tanks, and I can that not like army tanks, but like a milk truck or whatever. And I used to have a hazmat license. I don't have that anymore because I don't need it for what I do, and it's such a pain to take the test and renew it every 2 years or whatever it is. You have to get fingerprinted and get approved by the Department of Homeland Security and everything. They have to do this extensive background check. So I just did that once, and I haven't done it again. And then there's also the school bus endorsement, which I don't have, and the passenger endorsement, which allows you to haul more than 16 passengers, which I also don't have. So I just have a Class A license with no restrictions. So I could drive a manual transmission, and I can haul a fifth wheel trailer, not just a pintle hitch trailer. And then I can haul double trailers or triple trailers and tankers.
Dang, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of different things you could drive. You're pretty versatile. So when it comes to your own journey, I know some people do know who you are and some of the work you've done, but just for people who might not have caught on to the things you've been doing in terms of the liberty sphere, could you just give us a little rundown of kind of what you do and what you've been doing in terms of talking about the principles of liberty and things like that?
Sure. So I remember in high school, I graduated in 2012, and I was kind of paying attention to Ron Paul, and I liked him because he was sincere, but I wasn't really listening to his message that closely. I wasn't really internalizing it. And then after the 2012 election, I voted for Romney. And then I kind of went back and was listening to some of Ron Paul's videos. I was like, wow, this guy's really right about a lot of this stuff. And so then I found out about his son, Rand Paul, and he really caught my attention when he was filibustering John Brennan's nomination to be CIA director. And so then I started following him really closely. And then when he announced his presidential run in 2015, or it might have even been late 2014, whenever it was, I was 100% behind him, really excited. And then it just didn't really go anywhere, kind of fell flat. And then, Trump was a bridge too far for me. And then obviously Hillary was a bridge too far. So I kind of looked into the Libertarian Party with Gary Johnson, and I did end up voting for him, but I was just kind of disappointed with how the whole thing went. And at first I kind of liked him, but the more exposure he got, he was just kind of an idiot. And I was like, man, is this really the best we can do? So then I kind of gave up on federal politics after that. I left the Republican Party in 2018, registered independent. And I thought I'd never vote for president again. Actually, I was just like, yeah, this is all a waste. I'll just vote locally. Then Tulsi Gabbard came on the scene in 2020, and I didn't agree with her on everything, but she had been very vocally against the war in Syria, and she was very vocally against the genocide in Yemen and supporting Saudi Arabia in general. And she was also good on like the drug war and ending the Patriot Act, freeing Julian Assange, Edward Snowden. She was good on a lot, better than anyone else. So I actually worked on her campaign in New Hampshire, and that kind of red-pilled me to how messed up the political system is, because the Democrats were just absolutely terrible to her. Like, she'd reach the polling amount she needed to be in the debates, and then they'd say, oh, actually you need this much, and then they were calling her a traitor and all this stuff. So it was crazy. But anyway, she didn't do very well. She ended up dropping out, endorsing Biden. So I was like, oh man, okay, I guess I'll take a look at this Libertarian Party thing again. And ended up being a joke in 2020 again. Just didn't really go anymore. I met Spike Cohen in Salt Lake City, and I really liked him. I listened to his speech, and I thought, wow, this guy's exciting. Why don't we have more of this? And then in the beginning of 2021, I got to know Dave Smith and Scott Horton. I had Tom Woods on my show. So I got to backtrack a little bit. In 2020, in May, I actually started doing my show because I felt like no one knew what libertarianism was or what libertarians were about, and that libertarians just came across as a bunch of like crazy weirdos who didn't know anything about real world problems. So I started doing my show, and I went all the way through 2020 without gaining too much traction, although I did post this gun video of me bump firing an M1 Garand, and that kind of took off and got hundreds of thousands of views and brought a lot of people to my channel. But then in 2021, I got Dave Smith on my show, Ryan Dawson, Tom Woods. And then like as the year kept going, it got even crazier. I got Peter Schiff, Abby Martin. And then this year I've had like James Lindsay and James Corbett. And, it's been crazy how much it's taken off. But on my show, I talk mostly about the idea that we've just gotten to such an artificial society that we live in now, both politically and economically, and then also culturally. Like we've elevated people to positions of power in all three of those areas that they don't belong in. Like we bail out businesses when we should let them die. We have pseudo intellectuals who are running our institutions and doing the thinking for us. And then politically, like we have people like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden who are at the top. And it's just crazy. And I think part of the problem is that we have, when we try to set the standard for the status quo, we actually make it the lowest common denominator. This is the way everything works. Like you get participation trophies if you just show up instead of actually trying to win the gold medal now. At work, with all the regulations, they're designed for idiots. They're not designed for someone who has any sort of common sense. They make you wear a harness if you're 4 feet off the ground. You need to wheel chalk a bulldozer if you're in a mine. I mean, it's just completely crazy, stupid stuff that they make everyone do. So I actually think we need to embrace a little bit of Darwinianism and kind of let businesses fail if they can't compete, and stop elevating people who don't have good ideas to the top, and stop censoring people who do have good ideas because they excel compared to everyone else. Just let the best ideas win out, let the best businesses win out, and then let the best people lead, because that's not what we have anymore. So the name of my show is The Naturalist Capitalist, because I think that both of those words kind of envelop that idea. Like, I think capitalism is natural law. It's just letting people trade with each other, and if you have something I want, I will give you something in order to get it. And we have just had our finger on the scales too long. So that's what I talk about mostly. I talk about foreign policy, a little bit into conspiracy theories, talk about economics, talk about religion, talk about all sorts of things. And I have right, left, center, libertarian people on, and I just like to talk, because if what I believe is right, then the ideas should stand up. And if what I believe is wrong, the only way I'm going to find out is by talking to other people and having them convince me of their thoughts instead.
Yeah, no, I really like your approach there in terms of just getting a robust idea of different people's ideas and their missions and initiatives, because that's how you sharpen your own skills, right? Just having the conversation and getting it out there. And I think you called it Darwinian. I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily, put it that way. It's just the idea that bad ideas need to fail, right? You don't want for bad things, that is unsuccessful things or things that actually help people or hurting people, to keep being worked on over time, right? And that's a big difference, I would say, between us who think about this in libertarian terms and communists, right? They often say, oh, well, there's so much failure of business under capitalism. Like, you do realize that you're saying that everything should succeed just because someone has an idea, right? Like, just because someone makes, Sonic Mario furry fan art doesn't mean that, oh, okay, that they should just be continually funded in doing that. Like, some things have to be able to say, yeah, okay, yeah, no, that doesn't, you don't deserve to succeed just because you come up with an idea. So I 100% agree with you on that, in terms of that type of thinking. When it comes to what you've experienced over these years, because you've been, pretty active these past couple of years, and like, as you said, like, quick acceleration, it really, like, going from like start your own thing to be like, okay, I'm hanging out, having a good time, checking stuff, to like, oh my gosh, I'm on Fox News, I'm talking to, cool people, actually influencing things on a big scale. How would you say that's affected your perspective of things, the more access you've had to talking to different types of people on that scale, and just kind of getting to see those different perspectives?
Well, I'm sure you can relate to this. In regular life, I'm usually the smartest person in the room. Like, if I start talking about the clean break strategy and arming ISIS against Assad and, quantitative easing, I mean, people will look at me like I'm speaking Mandarin. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But once you get in these circles and you're talking to people like Scott Horton, Ryan Dawson, James Lindsay, people who actually study the hell out of all this stuff, I feel like an idiot. I feel like I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. So just from talking to these people for hours, and then I usually re-listen to the episodes after I shoot them. I probably know like 40 times what I did when I first started my show. And I hope that's been the same for my audience. I hope my audience has also learned. Like, I'm kind of along for the journey with my audience. And I think what they like about me is I don't really bullshit them. I don't pretend to know about stuff that I don't know about. And I try to talk to people who disagree with me in a humble way too. Cause I was a neocon, a decade ago. And I have changed so much since then. So I realized that other people are on that journey too. And you can't just be judgmental toward anyone who doesn't agree with you yet, or hasn't gotten there, or doesn't know the same things you do. Most people don't have time to listen to hours and hours of Scott Horton or Tom Woods, or to read Man, Economy, and State. That like takes a lot of time and diligence and commitment. And a lot of people work 50, 60 hours a week. They also have a family, and, they want to chill out and watch TV occasionally and spend time with their kids. So, what little I can do to try to, pass the information along to them is, it's an honor and a privilege. And I just try to remember where I come from, and that these people are, they're in a similar learning experience, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree that when it comes to people who are, still they're new to the journey, it's very important to communicate them with that understanding, because I'm there with you with being a former neocon. I mean, we're talking like support Israel. Oh yeah, send them some more money. It's all good. And yeah, oh yeah, war is going to be great. There's nothing wrong with trying to bring democracy and peace through the strong military presence. I mean, I grew up with all those types of things. I gave the lip service to liberty, but not the true robust principled approach. So I appreciate that you have that self-reflection and really value that and kind of try to pay it forward to others. What would you say within the past 2 years you found your biggest personal growth changes to be, at least intellectually, since maybe starting your show or things like that? What would you say has really changed the most for you?
I used to definitely be a minarchist, and probably in like 2018, libertarians might have not even really liked me, a lot of them, because I was anti-war. I was pro smaller government, pro balance the budget, pro gun rights. But, it was more like we need to audit a lot of these departments and, fix them and just choose better people to run them. You could probably say I was a little bit blue-pilled. And then working on the Tulsi campaign and then witnessing 2020 just really radicalized me, I guess. Just made me realize, like, wow, it's not that these people are just misled, they're evil and they're doing this intentionally. Because I mean, it wasn't too long ago, like several years ago, I would have said, like, yeah, Obama, I don't agree with him on everything, but that's fine. He's just, that's the type of mentality I probably had like 5 years ago. And the last couple years, I've just realized that there is an agenda that is shared by a large group of people who just want to control and to profit and to destroy as much as they can. So I've become an anarchist. Like I've called myself an anarchist for about a year now, and it's funny because that was a term that I was kind of scared to admit. I never wanted to be an anarchist. Like, that's terrifying territory, right? Like, that's insane. Like, how can you actually think that? So I just kind of avoided traveling in those waters. But I remember now it's 2 years ago, in like late 2020, after the election, I was like, why do we have this federal government? What is it actually doing for us? After we'd seen the bailout package through the CARES Act that had happened, and then especially after we got the second one right before Christmas that almost everybody voted for without reading it, and it was 5,500 pages long, and it sent billions of dollars overseas to other governments, and $100 million to Pakistan for gender studies or whatever. And I'm pretty sure in Pakistan, gender studies means throwing gay people off a roof and seeing what happens to them. It's like, what does that even mean in Pakistan? But I just really came to the conclusion that this whole thing is evil. It's not that it's not working as intended. It actually is working as intended. Like, this is the whole point of government, to expand and gain more power. So then I actually finally read Lysander Spooner, No Treason, and that just did it for me. I was like, all right, yeah, you know what? I am look, the Spooner pill. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I am an anarchist. So that's probably the biggest change I've gone through. And then another one is I was totally on board with, like, we got to reunite this country and we're all Americans and we need to get along because this is a crazy experiment we've done the last 250 years and this is great. To, you know what, if we don't get along, maybe we should divorce and we shouldn't hang out with each other. Because I've realized how much Americans really do hate each other over the last 2 years, and that maybe there's not a good way to coexist. Like, I think removing a lot of state power would help with our coexistence, but I am fully in support of secession at this point, or some sort of peaceful dissolution, or at least some crazy reinstitution of the 10th Amendment that just makes it so the federal government basically has no power at all and it's just symbolic. So I'd say, yeah, I've just become more radicalized and more anarchist and more prone to secession than trying to save whatever this idea of, a federation of 50 states that we have is.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's a great journey. I mean, I could say with my bias, I appreciate that you've moved down that
Right.
path, and I also agree with you there about the maliciousness part. There is a big divide that a lot of people have between the idea of, is it just economic ignorance, and if only they knew economics they would change, versus imputing intent with maliciousness, people trying to orchestrate things and actually try to do harm, like consciously. And to me, there is both. There is economic ignorance, I would say, at large with a lot of people. There's economic ignorance, including with people who are politicians, puppeteering their way up. But independent of that, as I'm sure you've seen at this point, there are people who meet up every year, at the Bilderberg Group and at the World Economic Forum and things like that, and they are all working together and sharing their ideas about how to further enslave humanity and to secretly kill off people in different ways. So it's one of those things that people who are kind of just NPC or borderline NPC level, they just used to whatever they were in public school, and they just watch the news. It's like something that's outside their imagination. Like, what? That's dystopian fiction. That's something that's like, no, it's pretty real. It's been around for a long time. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone who, and I'm including my former self here, I don't know how anyone who really knows history really well could be surprised by any of that. I mean, because there's been countless examples of governments throughout history that do nothing but try to expand their power and persecute people they don't like, and gain more influence around the world. Like, that's just what government does. So I feel like anyone with an honest intellect will arrive at that same conclusion, that government is evil.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And obviously my view is that the nature of government, of course, is the initiation of force. It's a small group of people claiming to own a bunch of people that already existed, and their houses and their buildings and businesses. They're saying, oh, this is ours now, just by planting a flag. But it's even more sinister than that. The deeper you go and the more you look into the historical royal families and how they try to maintain power. I mean, I tell people today, like, the Queen still has ownership in the Constitution of Canada and Australia and like other provinces. I mean, there's a huge Commonwealth ownership that's default technically the Queen still. Like, it sounds like something that's like out of some Disney movie, but it's like, this is real. This is like, it hasn't changed. It's really crazy. But I appreciate that you continue to keep reading, researching, learning into that and stuff like that. So that's awesome. Would you say now more than ever, when it comes to your advocacy, do you promote nullification, secession, and things like that, like as the thing that you really value? Is there anything else that you kind of like really like seeing, in terms of supporting things like that in terms of change?
Yeah, so I am moving back to New Hampshire, which is where I'm from. I live in Utah right now. And it's funny, I left New Hampshire in March 2020, March 3rd, 2020, which was like 2 weeks before the whole world fell apart. And, I've lived out here in Utah the last 2 years, and it's been great, like doing the trucking job. I've been able to get this podcast off the ground and everything. But my whole family lives back in New Hampshire, and I got lots of friends back there. And it happens to be the place where the Free State Project is taking off. And when I lived there before, I knew what it was, but you didn't really hear much about it because it wasn't honestly that successful. When I left New Hampshire, red flag laws had just passed the House and Senate in New Hampshire, and the Republican governor vetoed them. That was the only thing that stopped them from becoming law. And Bernie Sanders had just won the primary. So I was like, man, this is the free state. Like, what am I still doing here? But over the last couple of years, a lot of people have moved there. A lot of people have been radicalized just like I have. And now the Free Staters control a good portion of the legislature. So I'm going to move back there because I don't think protest or fighting against the government in an actual violent way are the most successful ways to create movements that break off. Like, I think if New Hampshire could sponsor Defend the Guard legislation, and, if it could eventually become like an income tax haven or something like that, if you have enough people there who all agree that we need more liberty and that we need to remove as much support from the federal government as we can, that's the best way to force change. I think individual states nullifying federal mandates is the most effective way. And I think New Hampshire is the most likely state to have a lot of success with that. I mean, Florida is interesting where you're from, But in my opinion, a lot of it's been too centralized the way that change has been orchestrated. Like if you guys get a Democrat governor next time, which hopefully you won't, but if you do, pretty much everything that DeSantis has done can just be undone with a pen, where the way New Hampshire's going about it is they're actually trying to get people elected to local offices throughout the legislature, and they're building in blockades to make it so that a governor, I mean, I think right now the way the legislature has overhauled things, it is impossible for the governor, regardless of who he is in New Hampshire, to lock the state down again. And that's really, I think, the best way to attack it. So yeah, I will be standing the hell out of the Free State Project, and I'll be moving back there in a few months. And I think everyone, whatever state they're in, whatever local action you can take to remove power from whatever central hub it's coming from is the best. So if you're in your state, try to remove your county power from, the governor. Like, try to do whatever you can to localize as much as possible. And I think that's the way we eventually win.
Yeah, I appreciate that discussion that you had there. And just for anybody who doesn't know, the Free State Project is a project in New Hampshire where, you could say essentially decentralized group of liberty-oriented people are trying to change things politically, getting people to move there and then to get active and to try to fill in the seats of the state's legislature and, of course, the governorship to change things for liberty, basically get the government out and, really put some actual teeth behind that in the legislation that's passed. I think that their efforts absolutely are admirable, and I love it. I love the Free State Project. I'm a huge fan of their work. Absolutely. I can't do New Hampshire. Can't do the weather. Yeah, it's like, again, I love what they do, support them. I got to do my thing here and, promote liberty here. But I really, absolutely love what they're doing. And anytime someone says, hey, where can I move for liberty, this, that, I always say New Hampshire is one of the top places to go, especially if you like to be able to have a little snow and some mountains, and there's beaches and stuff. It's not always the warmest, but they got some diverse terrain. But again, it's a great group of people, and I'm very thrilled to hear that you're going there and contributing to that as well. That's absolutely fantastic. And just that comparison that you made is very interesting to think about, the idea of the centralization versus decentralization, because I do agree that one of my biggest complaints about DeSantis and what's going on here that I think a lot of people miss is that their method was centralization of power. It wasn't, okay, we're going to make a law, you need a supermajority in order to even have an emergency order or something like that. They're like, no, we're just going to say, okay, we preempt, and they did this legislatively, all the localities. And that's, of course, that sounds good at first. Like, yeah, okay, they stopped it. But then it's like, but wait, what happens, right, when that gets used for something you don't like? Okay, right. Then it's a real problem. I completely agree. And I think that's why that needs to be an emphasis in any type of activism, whatever someone's chosen path is, whether they're in a RLC or a Libertarian Party or just whatever, the focus should be, hey, how do we actually decentralize? How do we get rid of that power? How do we use federalism, like the concept of trying to split things apart in terms of the powers and trying to, resist the urge, be like, yeah, we got to just make it all right through this one vehicle of the federal, the executive, whatever. So it's a tough balance. And I think that sadly, too many people are short-sighted about that fact. And that I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to know and have seen the effects of that what happens when you keep centralizing and then, suddenly it's an issue you don't agree with, but it's a party that you're like, yeah, I support them, but it's an issue you don't agree with, or a change in powers. You said if it changes to a party that you really don't like and they're doing a lot more you don't agree with, well, now you just gave them all that ability to do that with the validation and stamp of approval in the courts and the executive orders and the legislature. So absolutely. So in terms of what types of things that you would like to be involved with yourself, when you move there, do you see yourself taking part, in terms of running for anything or like being a type of support in that way?
Yeah. So immediately, Jeremy Kaufman is a friend of mine. He's the CEO of Library. And a lot of people know the platform Odyssey. That's part of Library. And he's running for U.S. Senate, which I think is very interesting. Because typically I'm not huge about federal elections, but he's a guy who actually has traveled around the world doing speeches. He's been on, big platforms. He's created a company. So he's actually a very impressive individual, which you don't find running as a libertarian that often. So I think he can bring a lot of attention that maybe other candidates won't. And I think sometimes the attention you bring is more important than the electoral success you have. But I also think New Hampshire, has a lot of potential. Like, I don't think it's impossible for him to win. I think it actually could happen. So I'm going to work on his campaign as soon as I get back. I'm probably not going to run for anything in 2024 just because I want to be available for the presidential campaigns that could be taken off. But I actually do currently plan on running for state legislature in 2026. And New Hampshire is a state that has a huge House of Representatives and Senate. I think it's New Hampshire's government is like the third largest English-speaking government in the world. Because there's like one representative from every town, and there's over 300 towns in New Hampshire. So some of the seats you're running for, you could literally go shake hands with every single one of your constituents before the election. There's some tiny towns with, 2,500 people or whatever. So that's something that's very interesting to me. And I know the state very well, and I know a lot of people in the state. I'm well known in certain areas of the state. And now that my show is taking off, and if I can get involved with Jeremy Kaufman's campaign and then maybe Dave Smith's campaign in a couple of years, then I'll have some more name recognition. And yeah, I think running for state legislature and, working in the state house, and then maybe run for state senate eventually, and then maybe run for, U.S. Congress eventually, who knows? But yeah, the sky's the limit, and that's the direction I'm heading in, I think.
Well, I mean, that's great. U.S. Congress would be really scary because, as you said, and I 100% agree there, that is the most evil, corrupt organization in arguably the world, or close to it. You know what I mean? It's up there. Yeah. It's a very crude and conniving place, to say the least. So that'd be very, very, very daunting. But yes, absolutely. In terms of what you could do in New Hampshire, as you said, it's a place that's wide open to being able to actually make some real change in terms of actually getting out there and getting legislation passed that actually reduces the government in size, scope, the whole thing, all the way down. It's actually much more plausible there. So that's awesome. What would you say is your top priorities if you were to run in New Hampshire? What would you say that you would really be looking at right off the bat? Like, here's what I'm going to focus on.
Probably defend the guard legislation. And depending on how far New Hampshire progresses in the next few years, I'd be wanting to decriminalize all drugs. That's something that New Hampshire is really bad about. I know they're rated number 1 in the country for overall freedom, but on drug laws, they're still pretty bad. And then we have really high property taxes there, which it's an interesting situation because I'm obviously against all taxes, but I feel like the best form of taxes is actually a sales tax, because I think property taxes are just the most evil thing ever. And then income taxes don't make any sense because they're disincentivizing you to earn money and to save. And, I feel like a consumption tax or a sales tax is actually the best type of tax. But New Hampshire doesn't have a sales tax, and it doesn't have an income tax, and it gets everything through property taxes, basically. So that's going to be an interesting hurdle to jump and try to figure out how we can decrease those and how we can convince people that's a good idea. But that would certainly be on the docket, lowering property taxes. And then I would be all for any type of legislation to secede from the Union, which New Hampshire did. They did introduce a bill a few weeks ago, and some people sponsored it, which was funny. And then I'd obviously be for any sort of nullification, like Second Amendment, sanctuary, anything like that. It would basically be, what can we do to remove ourselves from the federal government should be number 1. I think that's even more important than working on the problems within the state. If you can actually reduce the amount of support you're giving the federal government, but then at the same time also trying to work on those inner issues.
Right. And I think that, when it comes to the policies you just mentioned, most people get the idea of, lower my damn property taxes. Definitely, the idea of, okay, let's nullify the federal government, say, no, we're not having your mandates apply here, stuff like that. But the one thing I think people don't know as much about is the Defend the Guard legislation. Could you explain a little bit about what that is and what that entails?
Yeah, so the Defend the Guard legislation is a state-by-state bill that makes it impossible for the president to deploy the National Guard overseas unless there is an actual declaration of war. And we haven't had an actual declaration of war since 1941. After the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we declared war on Japan, and then we declared war on Germany shortly after. That was the last time we actually officially declared war. We have had things like the authorization of use of military force, and we had police actions in Vietnam, so we've had all these cute ways of getting around actually declaring war and sending troops places, but you would not be allowed to do that with the National Guard anymore. So it's a state by state thing. I would love to see New Hampshire become the first state to sponsor it. They don't really have an excuse. It's where all the libertarians are moving. It's the live free or die state. It's not a very big state. It's easy to take over. And if one state leads the way, I'd love to see other states follow with that. And I think, that's way bigger than trying to elect a president who's anti-war, because even if you get a president who is anti-war and you somehow get him in that seat, I mean, we saw what they did. I'm not suggesting Trump was anti-war, but he did want to leave Afghanistan, and they kept throwing roadblocks in his way for leaving Afghanistan. When he talked about trying to leave Syria, like they threw all sorts of roadblocks in his way again. When Biden finally did pull us out of Afghanistan, there was all sorts of propaganda to try to get us to stay there. So it's going to be a very hard road for anyone who's in that position of power to actually be able to bring all the troops home. It would be near impossible. So if we could do it state by state and just make it that much harder for them to send our boys to war, and if they actually have to get a 2/3 congressional approval through a declaration of war, that is going to slow them down a lot more. So it's pretty amazing legislation. And I just did an episode on it last night with Scott Horton and a few guys from Utah. So if you guys want to learn more about it, go check out my latest video on my channel.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that type of legislation is something that is a simple way to just try to frustrate the federal government's plans to use people as pawns in wars and basically cannon fodder. I think that we need more of those types of things propping up in different states where there's actual resistance of saying, no, we're not going to participate in your wars. We're not going to fund it. We're not going to help you in any which way. And that's just a negative action thing, right? That's not something that's saying, okay, the government needs to do something. That's saying, no, don't do something. And I think, to me, that's the best way to go. If you're going to propose legislation or work in that realm, think about all the ways that you can stop government action or curtail it or just frustrate it as best as possible so that it just doesn't get accomplished or people can outmode it outside of the state. And I think that's absolutely wonderful that you have that mentality on there and that you're focused on that type of legislation. That's fantastic. So when it comes to your intersectioning, I'm like all tongue-tied here. I'm like, yeah, sex of mine, right? You're so beautiful. Intersectioning between trucking and liberty and things like that. How has your experiences with other people in your industry, impacted you and helped you share the message of liberty and things like that with them? Being able to talk about these kind of issues, being hands on the wheel in this kind of across America business and industry.
Yeah, so it's a pretty solitary lifestyle. So actual person-to-person interactions haven't happened much, but there are a lot of truck drivers who watch my show. There are a lot of people that I've worked with in the past when I was working on power lines, which is, you still have trucks. It's just not over-the-road trucking. But, my boss watches my show, and he's shared it with a lot of his friends. And all sorts of blue-collar people watch me. And they realize that I'm not just sitting in some ivory tower, that I actually, like you said, have my hands on the wheel. It's where the rubber hits the road, literally. And, having done other sorts of blue collar work in my past, I have seen how the educated class or the preparation class or the blueprint class, whatever you want to call them, the people who are putting everything together and it works in theory, and then they send it to the people who have to actually do it. And you find out, hey, this bolt doesn't line up. And, you'll be arguing with some engineer 7 states away on the phone, and he's telling you, well, on my computer, it says it lines up. It's like, well, dude, I'm here with the pieces of steel and it doesn't. Or when you go to, now the job I have now, when you go to fit a load on the truck and, hey, well, it doesn't fit on the trailer, or, hey, it won't, the axle spacing isn't right and it won't weigh out the way you want it to. I won't be able to go through Utah or whatever state because I'm overweight or whatever. You actually find out the reality of things with this type of job. And I think that gives me an edge that other people don't have, because most people, who are podcasting, they are more white collar, or they have some sort of like artistic ability, or, it just doesn't typically involve any sort of blue collar work. So I think I'm starting to see some other people like Tommy Salmons of the Year Zero podcast, Kyle Matovic of the In Liberty and Health podcast. There are people who are starting to spring up who do have these blue collar connections. Jacob Winograd of Biblical Anarchy is another one. He works on vehicle transmissions. I think all the podcasts that we can do where people live real lives and have real jobs and aren't just stuck in an office where they're thinking about stuff all day, I think that will connect with, blue collar America. And as we're seeing right now, there's a trucking convoy that's actually taken off from California today, headed across the country to DC. And as we have seen up in Canada, the blue collar people, they're the ones who really, really hold most of the frustration and want to see most of the change, and they've been ignored. And when they're ignored, they revolt. So they're the people that we really want to talk to. They're the ones who run this country. They're the ones who keep everything moving. And people who are blue collar, they're usually harder to fool. They can smell bullshit more easily, and they also have seen how unrealistic the ruling class is, because they have put all these projects together for them to do, and then they see when they have to actually put their hands on them that they don't work. So it's easy to convey that to them with foreign policy or with economic policy or with anything that, hey, these people, these bureaucrats making these laws, they're the same as the engineers who are putting your project together that doesn't work. They have this theory in their head that it'll work out fine in the end, but instead you end up with inflation. You end up with terrorist groups springing up in the Middle East. So I think that, having a blue collar connection is vital, and that these people, they can't be ignored, and they're the ones who we should be reaching out to the most.
I think that you're bent in terms of sharing your ideas from your real life experience, and you're in the truck right now. I think that's just so incredibly important, because I think there is that type of castigation and downplaying of people, and be like, oh, you're stupid, you're just a truck driver, you're just a mechanic, whatever, what do you know? And it's ridiculous, because it's like, yeah, they live lives too, they talk to people, you share ideas. Just because you're working with your hands or doing heavy construction stuff like that doesn't mean that you don't think otherwise. And I think that is so important to recognize and to really reach out to people on, because as you said, with the the DC and the Beltway people and stuff like that, they just want to be like, oh, you're stupid, you're nobody, you're just some woods hick, what do you know, you're just like whatever. It's just a total denigration of people who, yeah, okay, so what, you get dirty when you work, so what? It's like, and I still produce value for others, and probably make more money in many ways than many people who are just sitting at their office desk jobs at some DC, whatever type of think tank or whatever. So it's just, I think it's just really important for people to recognize that and to value that diversity of thought and experience, and to not just downplay something just because it's like, oh, okay, well, you're not, an academic at this institute or at this, Harvard University. So it's like, okay, yeah. And that doesn't mean that you can't engage with ideas and learn from others and share experiences. And as you said, just like the engineer in you with the reality, right? You have the projection of what you think will work, and then you have when the actual thing gets made, and you're like, oh, okay, someone didn't design this exactly right. You know what I mean? So I think that's a beautiful thing that you have there, and you're able to convey to others. In your experience now that you've kind of been applying this in your own life, how would you tell others who might be similarly situated to you? Maybe they have some expertise in another type of field, blue collar work or otherwise. How would you express to them how they can share with others better and do kind of like that outreach in how, you did, and you started to say, I'm going to start talking about this. How would you encourage those people?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody is good at communication. And so if you're not good at communication, then, maybe communicating is not for you. But if you are, just start talking about it with people, because if your ideas make sense, people will listen, and your ideas will stand up to the test of scrutiny. That's, I mean, people ask me, how did you get where you are podcasting? And I said, by driving a truck, like that's what it was. I just started listening to more podcasts while I was driving, and I would just kind of open my computer when I got home or when I'm still in the truck and just ramble. Then I had a couple of my friends on and would just start rambling, and then that evolved into getting Spike Cohen on eventually, and then getting Dave Smith on, and then Peter Schiff, and then the sky's the limit from there. So if you have the ability to convey these ideas in a coherent and life applicable way to people, then do it. Because a lot of people are thinking about things that they haven't before, just because of how crazy everything's been. I mentioned I was working on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign in 2019, and I remember knocking on doors and trying to tell people about the genocide in Yemen, and it just fell flat. No one cared. Like, they're like, oh, we're doing that? Wow, that's terrible. And that was about it. You had to try to give them something, something that they could relate to that's going on in their own lives. And now so many people have been affected by the stupidity and malice of the federal government that their mind is way more open to all this stuff. If you had told them that the government was an evil group of, robbers and murderers and conniving thieves or whatever 2 years ago, they probably wouldn't have listened to you. They would have been like, wow, you're just kind of, you've kind of gone off the deep end or whatever. But now they're much more likely to hear you out because they've seen it. They've lost their jobs. Their kids are being taught crazy things in schools. They're, depending on what state they're in, there's medical apartheid that has been initiated. And so they're just way more ready to hear you out and, take advantage of it, because you never know, we all have slightly different ways of messaging. This is something that Larry Sharp has said that I really think is true. A lot of people get angry when they see somebody else approaching the issues in a different way. And as long as we are all selling the same thing, I don't think it matters how we sell it. Some people are imposters and they're not selling the same thing. They are saying they're libertarians and they're Bill Weld. Like, no, those people suck. Like, yeah, that's not what we want. But a lot of people just have different ways of approaching how they message and how they connect with people. And we need every single approach and every single way of messaging, because everybody's different. Some people are going to really get turned off by Scott Horton, and some people are really going to like Dave Smith, and some people are really going to hate Peter Schiff, and some people are really going to like, Larry Sharp or whatever. So that's fine. Like, just realize that not everyone likes your style and not everyone hates the same style that you hate. Let's all just, use our collective gifts and our collective knowledge and ability to convey those ideas and try to bring as many people to our side as we can.
Yeah, I completely agree. A multi-pronged approach. There's just all different types of people and preferences, just like music or food, right? Nobody's like, oh yeah, everybody loves country music or everybody loves rap. I mean, duh. It's like, different people like different ways of hearing the same concept, music or food, right? Not everybody likes Chinese food. I mean, I hate tuna fish. I don't know. What's your least favorite food?
I think the only thing I don't like are pickles, to be honest. I'll eat just about everything else, but
so right, liberty through pickles would not be your thing, right? It's just liberty pickles, so it's just the idea that you don't have to reach everybody. You just have to reach people who happen to already like the kind of zone or genre things that you do. And again, it doesn't have to be millions, doesn't have to be 10,000, doesn't have to be 1,000, doesn't even have to be 100. It could just be as small as 10 people that friends are with or whatever. And you just have some shared things. You just talk about it, whatever it is. I agree. There's different ways to talk to people and there's different ways to connect. And you don't have to win over the world to make that change that then helps others and moves them forward and so forth. And with that, who would you say, I'll give you actually a couple. I'll give you two. Who would you say your two biggest influences are for your journey to the point you are now? Who would you say are your two biggest influences of thought that have really helped you get to where you are?
Probably Peter Schiff and Ryan Dawson, to be honest, and I've had both of them on my show. So Ryan more through just being around him and having him on my show so many times, and then Peter Schiff really red-pilled me on economics and how it works, because I used to be kind of like, yeah, I'm a capitalist, but we need some regulation and we need the government to keep an eye on this and this. And he just made me realize that the government is the problem. But yeah, probably those two guys, to be honest. Ryan, the way he influenced me the most is that the contrarian kooks who just like sensationalize everything, they are basically just as big a threat to the truth as the establishment is. And they're also basically running cover for the establishment because they're letting the establishment dictate truth. If the establishment says something and you just always say the opposite no matter what, you're still letting them make the rules instead of thinking independently and trying to figure out what's actually going on. The truth is usually complicated. It's usually somewhere in the middle. It's usually unsettling and disturbing and not just this like solid, clean cut, solution that you were looking for. So yeah, I would say those two guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I appreciate that. And if people want to connect with you, see what you're doing, follow along with your work and things like that, what are the best places for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Reed_Coverdale. And then I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Gab, Getter, and Float. I think all of those, well, on Facebook, I'm Naturalist Capitalist. I have a page, and then I have my personal page where I'm Reed Coverdale. And then all those other platforms, you'll find me as Reed Coverdale. I also am on YouTube. That's where I live stream all my shows to. So you'll find me under Naturalist Capitalist on YouTube and Odyssey. Usually the videos go straight to Odyssey within like a day or so after I live stream them to YouTube. And then I upload everything in audio format to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and a couple other audio platforms. And if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon. Just look up Patreon, Reed Coverdale. I'm the only one, and you can support me there. And I'll have a website coming out soon once I finally get a day off and some time to design something nice. And you'll be able to follow everything there once I have that set up. And I already did buy the domain name. It's going to be naturalistcapitalist.com.
Awesome. Are you going to be doing any live speaking engagements or going to any events in the near future, anything like that?
Yeah, so this weekend, actually, in South Jordan, Utah, which is in Salt Lake area, Scott Horton's going to be flying in, and Friday night we'll be having a dinner, and then Saturday we'll be doing an event where he's going to speak about Russia. I will be introducing him. Next weekend, I'll be in Washington, D.C. from, Wednesday the 2nd through Sunday the 6th. And I'll be there with Ryan Dawson and Eric Jackman and a few other people for some anti-APAC convention thing that's going on. And I think the truckers are also going to be converging on Washington, D.C. at that time. So I'll be reporting live on the ground what's going on there. And yeah, that's about it for the upcoming events in the near future right now.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time to talk with us about your work and what you're doing and your journey. And it sounds like you got some wild adventures coming up. I hope that you have a safe trip, especially to the DC area. That's going to be pretty crazy out there. Absolutely. Especially with the trucker stuff. So I hope that, you're safe and you don't end up getting surrounded by a huge team of Secret Service agents or anything like that. So, fingers crossed, we'll be checking you out on your stream there, making sure that you're still alive and well as everything's going down. So.
Yeah, there you go. Some tall truck driver named Ray Epps ends up getting out and saying, "Let's go into the Capitol." Well, no, not to follow that guy. So,
right. Yeah. Make sure, do not go in that direction. Yeah, don't go. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Reed. I'm looking forward to your continued success and hopefully having you on here in the near future to catch up and see what's been going on with all your adventures. So thank you so much. And I don't have actually, I do have something planned, but not till next week for a show. I'll be on with Joshua Smith. So I'll let you all know when that episode will be coming out. But I do have that planned, I think, actually maybe the week after because of the event this weekend. So other than that, thanks so much, everybody, for staying on by. Thanks, Kenneth, and thanks, C Traffic. And thanks the Road to Providence with David Brady. Thanks, everybody, for coming on by and having a good time with us. So take care, everybody, and I'll see y'all later.
Thank you, Jack.
Zero State with Jack Lloyd.